Senator Grassley.
If you really want to care about working Americans, why wouldn't you want to do something about the terrible energy policies of this administration and the terrible spending policies of this administration that has raised inflation to a 40-year high and gas prices to a historic high last year and shooting up again? It seems to me that the Republicans have taken the right approach in this effort, because we do care about working Americans. I think that when it comes to inflation, I'd like to remind everybody of a statement that Paul Volcker made way back in 1981, but it was the same historical time we're in right now, a time of high interest rates and high inflation. His words and advice to Congress, it was advice to Congress, quote, "Cutting spending may appear to be the most painful part of the job, but I'm convinced that the pain for all of us will ultimately be much greater if it is not accomplished." I think in my opening comments, I'm going to try to make it clear that I think out of 11 times in over how many years, I don't know, the debt limit has been increased. It's been coupled 6 or 7 times at least with debt reduction, spending reduction, I should say. And it also is something that I'm going to show you that many Democrats have proposed in the past. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding today's hearing on the House-passed Limit, Save, and Grow Act. And I think the Grow Act is the most important part of that, because we're not going to improve the economy by taxing and spending more. And I don't know who out there believes that the government, of our witnesses, believes that the government's to answer every problem in the world. But remember, Washington consumes consumes wealth. It's the people out there in middle America and both on the West Coast and East Coast that do the work, that feed the money to this city that we spend and we consume. So House Republicans have acted responsibly by passing a debt limit increase while also beginning to tackle our country's unsustainable debt and deficits. Now, in contrast, President Biden and Biden's Senate Democrats have sat idly by, watching the clock tick down to default. By not thoughtfully engaging, they hope to avoid a substantive debate on a very serious fiscal issue, and that issue we all know is facing 330 million Americans. Now, I know that they're going to start meeting next Tuesday, but they wasted, I suppose as of now, about 97 days since Biden and McCarthy met in the White House way back in early February. So, in a last-bid effort to avoid an honest debate on our nation's finances, this week, you know what Senator Schumer did? He introduced legislation to suspend the debt limit until 2025. Schumer is too little and too late, as a growing number of congressional Democrats, yes, congressional Democrats, are starting to call on President Biden to negotiate. It's time for President Biden and Biden's Senate Democrats to come to a realization that their reckless and irresponsible strategy of delay has failed and begin negotiations in earnest. No longer can Biden Democrats ignore that over the next 10 years, deficits will average $2 trillion, or ignore that the public debt as a share of our economy is set to rocket past the previous World War II era records of 106% of GNP by 2028, or that interest costs are set to triple from $475 billion last year to $1.4 trillion by 2033. Our out-of-control debt is a bipartisan problem. But once President Biden and Biden Democratic Congress exacerbated through budget-busting partisan legislation and costly executive fiats. And they were warned in December of 2020 by their own economists, important Harvard economist and former Secretary of Treasury Summers, saying, listen, the economy's turned around by December 2020. We're on a path of growth. Don't spend any more money. Within less than 60 days, another $1.9 trillion. On January 21st, on January 20th, inflation was 1.4%. Don't forget, it immediately shot up to 9.1%. So our out-of-control debt is a bipartisan problem, and that's where it's going to have to be fixed. Don't forget that the deficit CBO is currently projecting through 2031 are $6 trillion higher than what the agency expected when Biden took office. Given our dismal fiscal outlook, it would be irresponsible not to follow the historical practice of pairing an increase in the debt limit with fiscal control to rein in Washington's chronic overspending. Simply kicking the can down the road can no longer be an option. The House bill starts to improve our unsustainable fiscal trajectory by repealing the president's unconstitutional student loan giveaway, another thing that's going to exacerbate inflation. Also paring back the reckless spending of Biden Democrats' Inflation Increasing Reconciliation Act and capping discretionary spending for next year at fiscal year 2022 levels agreed to by a Democratic Congress and in effect as recently as December. On that last point, it would be up to Congress, particularly the appropriators, to determine how to meet the discretionary top line. Nothing in this legislation mandates cuts to defense, veterans' health care, border security, or other activities that Republicans have already prioritized. Biden Democrats contend that doing anything but rubber stamping an unconditional increase in the debt limit is irresponsible. Well, just a few years ago, the very same Democrats, Biden Democrats, were singing a different tune. In 2017, Senator Schumer boasted about using the debt limit as, his words, leverage in negotiations with the White House. And in 2019, then Speaker Pelosi demanded that any debt ceiling suspension be paired with an increase in discretionary budget caps. She said, quote, when we lift the caps, then we can start talking about lifting the debt ceiling. And last but not least, then Senator Biden had this to say in 1984, shortly before he voted against raising the debt limit, quote, I cannot agree to vote for a full increase in the debt limit without any assistance or assurance that steps will be taken earlier next year to reduce the alarming increase in deficits and the debt. The fact is that debt limit legislation has always been the product of negotiations between White House and Congress. And it's long past time for President Biden to sit down with the Speaker and negotiate a deal like the one he brokered as Vice President in 2011. If it worked then, it can work now. Republicans aren't the only ones saying so. Even many Democrats are now telling the president he needs to sit down with congressional leaders. Well, we know that's going to happen next Tuesday. One Senate Democrat said that the president's refusal to meet with the Speaker, quote, signals a deficiency of leadership. So by now, maybe 95 days have been lost. Another Democrat in the House says that President and Speaker, quote, ought to get to work and get it done for the sake of the country, end of quote. The House Republicans' bill is meant to start a conversation. To start a conversation, not end it. Speaker McCarthy has said many times that he wants to negotiate with President Biden. So all the barbs and attacks on the House bill today are meaningless. Everyone knows it. This is an opening bid. It's time for President Biden to stop playing politics and demonstrate real presidential leadership by negotiating in good faith. And we'll find out whether it's in good faith next Tuesday. I'm glad that the president finally agreed to meet with congressional leaders, but a meeting is not the same as negotiation. I hope when the president sits down with the Speaker, he will bring an open mind and a serious counteroffer, because the longer the president spends dragging his feet and putting off negotiations, the closer President Biden brings us to the first ever federal default in U.S. history. Thank you.